Hi, and welcome to Journey Forward with Jory Rose, where you will gain insights, tools, and inspiration to get unstuck and live your best life. Jory is a licensed marriage and family therapist with a passion for helping people cultivate awareness and authenticity so they can show up fully in all aspects of their life. And now, here's Jory.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Journey Forward with Jory Rose. I am so happy to have my guest on today, Michelle Dench, and I'm so looking forward to what she's going to be able to share with us. We have a fun, kind of interesting history of how our paths have crossed, which I'll share in just a moment. But first, I just want to welcome you, Michelle, onto the podcast. Thank you so much for sharing some of your day with me today.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be having this full circle moment with you.
So we were just chatting before we hit record. So you and I met almost 10 years ago, probably 9.5 years ago, at one of those Pinot and palette sort of paint your own canvas being guided. And we were sitting next to each other. And what we were painting was a Buddha. And we just started chit-chatting. And it was towards the end of my marriage. And it was the last kind of one of many last little things to try to get my husband aligned in some activity that I don't think he wanted anything to do with, let alone painting a Buddha was not really in his wheelhouse. And you were there, and I don't think I've ever shared this with you. It was so interesting. I remember you next to me, you're on your left, and you were looking at your phone a lot. And in my mind, as we all do as humans, we create a story about people around us and what's going on. And I thought, oh, how interesting. She's painting a Buddha, but like on her phone, she seems really not present. And I remember asking you something and you telling me, oh, I'm looking at pictures of my baby boy. And you had made some comment that it was helping you within the painting. And it was so like one of those great reminders of like, don't form any story about anybody that you don't know anything about. And it's always humbling to remind her, like, get out of our own heads about ourselves, about others, right? Because you were on your phone drawing inspiration from this baby boy to help you with this painting. In fact, I remember you were telling me, I thought, how beautiful. It's helping her more present when our perception of others is a story. I don't think I'd ever told you that.
I know that about that experience, but I remember that time in my life. And wow, it's also so interesting to me because I also got divorced later on. And, I think that was similarly a time for me in my life when I was trying to really hold on to my marriage as well. And, no matter what, everything in life wants to move us forward to become more of who we truly are, right? That's the ultimate revealing process of life itself. So
if we can get out of our own ways to allow that unfolding to happen, right? Because we often get ourselves stuck. So from that night that we sat next to each other painting, which I'm pointing to, none of you guys can see because it's audio, but over my shoulder is the painting that I painted that night that has been hanging in my home office ever since. And then our paths crossed again at Spirit Rock and at Wisdom 2.0. I just came across a Facebook memory of Wisdom 2.0 one of those years. I'm like, oh my goodness, our paths continue to cross. And we've, of course, been connected on social media. And I thought, wow, I need to have Michelle on because I've become really interested in astrology as it seems to impact me more than I realize, but I don't know very much about it. And so please, with that very long kind of background to us, please introduce yourself and share with our listeners, what are you passionate about? How do you show up in the world? What are the gifts that you're bringing? And I'd love to hear then your journey of how you got to where you are.
Beautiful. Thank you. I remember some of those moments that we crossed paths again. I was a full-time financial advisor and a young mom. And I always had a passion for like getting an astrological reading on my birthday or going to see a tarot card reader, or, getting a psychic reading on my birthday. And then that eventually turned into a deep love of studying astrology, which I did immersively during the years that I was getting divorced. It was like some part of my soul was really trying to understand the nature of life, the nature of trauma and struggle and suffering. And what my soul was ultimately bringing me to was a deeply healing tool that became my professional career. So now
that's quite opposite from being a full-time financial advisor, isn't it?
Oh, it was such a such a journey to jumping off and ultimately leaving that whole world behind to start, doing something completely different. And as I discovered, it's not much different from the way I did financial advising. Like, I was deeply committed to helping people heal issues with money. And even though I eventually got to a point where I was managing millions of dollars and had, a full-time financial advising career, ultimately I could see how all the deeper emotional patterns that we have with money were driving clients to make decisions. And, astrology is a lot about understanding the stars and how they're as above, so below, right? How it's reflecting the experience that we have here on Earth. And to me, it's a similar way in which I'm working with a tool that is pointing towards and supporting people in ultimately coming to know themselves more deeply, understanding what is unfolding in life, understanding relationships. And, I've really come to love the language of astrology and to be able to help people even more.
So for those who feel like it's super woo-woo and, something that doesn't feel within grasp, can you give a background into helping explain to people, okay, planets and the moon and the sun, but like, what does it actually mean? And then like, what do we do with that information? And especially like, I know we look in our natal chart, which is, you can talk more about it, and horoscopes, and explain a little bit more, because I really subscribe to it and I also don't get it all at the same time. I believe in it, but I don't understand it.
Right. Well, that's one of the beautiful things about astrology is you don't have to believe in it for it to work or for it to be happening, right? You don't have to believe that the sun and the moon have an orbit, that our relationship on Earth relative to the sun or the moon or Venus or Mars or Pluto or any of the planets, right? Astronomically, astrology just is, right? We go through seasons. Those seasons are marked and by changes of light and dark. And they're different for the northern hemisphere than they are for the southern hemisphere. But those seasons mark what we would call the cardinal axis in astrology: the start of spring, the start of summer, the start of fall, and the start of winter. And then all of the planetary movements match and follow those cycles and rhythms. And regardless of whether you then interpret that to mean something else, it just is. It's just a part of our life, right? We're in Pisces season. The sun is in Pisces. Family members having birthdays and the celebration, that is a mutable water sign. It's a changing energy. It's the bridge between deep winter and the beginning of spring, right? And you can notice with the Pisces sun that there is more sensitivity and attunement to light and dark. There's a more emotional sensitivity as we're growing out of being in a time and place of, sort of cold winter, darkness, hibernation, more of an internal yin space, emerging into something new. Pisces is also the last sign of the zodiac. And so in astrology, it's the end of the end and the beginning of the beginning, right? It's a very cosmically attuned time. And that astronomical season also corresponds to the seasons of Lent, right? To the Jewish season of Purim, right? The entry, it's sort of a entry out of darkness into a celebration time. Before Passover, right before Easter, and it's very much representative of these deeper spiritual times of change and transformation that ultimately lead us to what is next. Aries, a cardinal season, a cardinal initiation. So a lot of what I do with astrology is working with the signs and the planets and the elements to interpret and translate what's happening in our lives. And the birth chart is just that. It's a moment in time. It marks the moment of your birth, for example, but it also encompasses the whole of life itself that was in that moment, right?
Right.
So it's all, it's all a way in which we can start to see the lens of life experience. And astrologers, many of them are trained in various different techniques. Predictive astrology is one form of astrology. I lean towards more of an intuitive, evolutionary approach. A lot of what I look at in the chart is channeled and comes through my own understanding of what I see and what I hear, in terms of, that might be a more woo-woo approach. But the evolutionary astrology is very much soul-based. It's saying that we're coming here, each and every one of us, a soul embodied in our life for a purpose, for a reason, to evolve, to come to know ourselves. And ultimately, I think that we're ourselves as love. Everywhere we've forgotten that we are that, we will play out life experiences, family dynamics, relationship dynamics. We'll be seeking through work or through connection with others or through our children and through our families to grow and to come to know ourselves even more deeply, right? And then everything that is not love, right, comes up, and we ultimately go through a purification process through the life that we're living.
It's so much. It almost feels so big to take in because there's so many elements. One of the things I've never understood is when you talk about like the sun and Pisces, like what does it mean when you're talking like the sun or moon placement in a different sign as opposed to your own astrological sign?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, well, the active participation of the astrology is what we would call transit astrology right now. Where are the planets right now? Those are the transits. If a baby were being born right now, I can tell you, it would have a Leo rising if it was here where I am in California, and a Pisces sun and a Pisces Mercury, and this would be the chart. There would be a chart for that moment in time. But obviously, as soon as you're born, the planets keep moving, and those transits are reflected through life experience, wherever you are, right? The astrology is adjusted to location and by moment.
Which is why knowing the time of day, like, when you were born matters.
Exactly. So it's part astronomical, right? That time of day that you give me, it matters if you were born at 6:33 a.m. versus 8 a.m. That it makes a huge difference because it's essentially the horizon of the sun is always moving from morning where the sun rises all the way until the end of the day when the sun sets and the stars come out. The cosmos is always moving and always changing. So that's kind of the difference astronomically between transit astrology and natal chart astrology.
So interesting. I recently was somewhere where there was an astrologer and I was able to get a reading, and I learned something about myself that I've never heard. And she didn't give me, we had like such a short little window because it was like at a weekend event. So everyone got like 10-minute time slot. I'm a Capricorn. My birthday is January 3rd, and I am I'm a real Capricorn. Like there's so much of it that really, really resonates. And when she read it to me, she said, I'm a double Capricorn. And I didn't really know what that meant. So if someone's like does that mean that there's another strength of Capricorn somewhere else based on the alignments of when I was born? What would that mean?
It could mean that you're a Capricorn rising, and so that Capricorn was rising on the horizon, and you were born with the sun in Capricorn. That would be my first interpretation of a double Capricorn. Could also mean a Capricorn moon.
I think it was the first. I think as you say that, I think it was
probably the first. Yeah, the Capricorn rising.
So it definitely strengthened some of my characteristics as a Capricorn.
Capricorn first house, Capricorn embodiment. Capricorn on the horizon would mean that the first house of your astrological wheel, your 12-part wheel, is Capricorn beginning the first house. And then that the sun is also in Capricorn in the first house, right? That's a deep, strong Capricorn archetype because it's ruled by Saturn. So the next thing I would be like is wondering where your Saturn is and what the placement of Saturn is. And I can say, just from you being a Capricorn sun and Capricorn ascendant, you've had Pluto in your first house. You've undergone a death rebirth process in your sense of self and identity over the last several years. And that process is coming to a close.
Thank fucking God.
You're going to be at the very end. And if you're in the late degrees of Capricorn, this year will be that final sort of push, right? If you're anywhere in the 27 to 29 degrees of Capricorn, and that final push is really shedding all of the places in relationship to self, relationship to partnerships or other relationships, your identities of mother, father, core parenting, right? The cardinal axis is Mother Moon, Father Saturn in Capricorn, right? And Aries, which is Mars, the masculine, and Libra, which is Venus, the feminine. So that core dynamic, cross of matter, basically, which makes up all life comes through those four archetypes: mother, father, masculine, feminine. Even with the widening awareness of gender identities and things like that, those fall into Aquarius, right? Those are different, but the transitional nature or the functional nature of life itself comes out of that cardinal axis. Everything's initiated.
Interesting.
Right.
So interesting.
That is being in its own death rebirth process. That means that how we parent, how we work, how we love, and how we live is undergoing a massive transformation. That's the collective level, but it's also the personal level, because these are all ruled by personal planets.
Right.
So, yeah. And late degree Capricorn folks have had it the hardest in that realm.
How would I know if I'm a late degree? Is that based on my natal chart?
Yeah, it is. I could do your natal chart, but I would need the year too, if you.
January 3rd, 1978. Now all you know my birthday. But if we're friends on Facebook, you would know that anyway.
Do you know what time you were born?
7:41 in the morning. This is real time, you guys. This is like getting a personal.
Yeah, I've never done a on the spot reading. Yeah. Oh, you're also a Capricorn Venus. Me too. Aw, that's great. Yeah, so she was saying you are a double Capricorn. Interestingly enough, your Capricorn Sun and Capricorn Venus all in the 12th house. Because your ascendant or the rising sign, what the ascendant was rising after the sun. So, you were born just a little after sunrise, basically.
Right.
That's kind of astronomically how it works. And yeah, I mean, I think you've probably already been through the bulk of it years before, maybe even beginning when we first met,
Yeah.
um, about 10 years ago. Pluto has been in Capricorn for quite a while, and we're in the last 2 years where its entry into Aquarius still means in your first house. And a lot of what's coming down the line will be really evolving the way in which your natural essence works and teaches and harmonizes in relationships. So this particular podcast, I think, is a great expression of who you are. Libra moon in the ninth house, teaching, speaking, talking about things that matter, that you care about, that you're deeply working on or working with or serving others through the way that you help, through the way that you work. And engaging in relationships and conversations and sharing that ultimately helps bring more emotional attunement, sensitivity, presence,
Yeah.
love into the world, right? So that what Pluto does in terms of in this year, and what the nodal axis of the moon does is really emphasizes how do you bring forward your voice with courage? How do you bring forward the things that are difficult, the things that most people aren't wanting to talk about, the hard soul work that they're having to do. They, and you know, a lot of the ways we are supported with the things that are taboo, that are challenging, the parts of us that are considered our darkness is usually behind the scenes. But in your case, this is what you're working with the mind, working with tools of meditation and mindfulness and awareness and practice and I'm doing all of this. I'm looking at the chart right now.
Yeah.
I'm just channeling all of this. This is how I work. But bringing that into daily life, daily health, mental health, personal well-being, and transformation. And you have Pluto in the ninth house, which is the signature of a teacher and a leader ruled by that Venus in the 12th house, who knows how to lead and to teach by knowing herself. Knowing herself and her unconscious, subconscious, and that's where your power, your light, your presence, and your capacity to meet others comes from, right? You have that Venus squaring the nodal axis. And when we're talking about the nodal axis, I'm talking about the nodes of the moon, which are the points in space astronomically where eclipses happen. But by cycle, they move around the zodiac every 19 years. And they essentially are in a sign for about 18 months. And right now, they're moving towards, what for you will be a nodal opposition. It's sort of a midpoint in that 19-year cycle, halfway between one cycle and the next. And the nodal return, along with many other planetary returns like the Saturn return, are big cycles in life where the soul is really growing into who we are, who we're meant to be, what our core purpose is, and overcoming life challenges or crises or healing or coming to learn the things, the tools through the relationships that are ultimately helping us to grow. Again, like I was saying before, into more of who we truly are, which is this essential bottom line that we are love.
Yeah.
And, if we've received parental conditioning, family conditioning, societal conditioning that has taught us, you are this, you are that, you're not this, you're not that, right? There might be a lot of undoing for us to get to the core of who we truly are. And the more we find who that is and we begin to share who that is, the more we match with relationships and people and life experience that shows us that reflection of love, right? So
it's also amazing. Everything you just described, it might be through a confirmation bias, right? But all of that feels so aligned. And this is why I find it so fascinating, because it feels a confirming or an affirming of I'm on the right path. I'm even all the hardships were all for purpose. It's getting me to exactly where I'm supposed to be. And to have that extra layer of guidance, or it even almost feels like support, right? To say like, okay, I get that. This is just what's occurring. And trust, be patient, go with the flow, stop being in resistance and fighting what is and what's here.
that's one of the big pieces of evolutionary astrology, that there's essentially two ways for us to work with our experience, which is resisting evolution or cooperating with evolution. And I studied Buddhism for many, many years and was like a devout meditation practitioner. And so I think of there's also a middle way, which is there. It's not quite surrendering or cooperating with evolution, but it's being with the process of the soul. And it's not, nor is it resisting. I do think there's a way that we can be with our life experience that's not either of those extremes, but from a place of center and a place of soul and self-reflection. And a lot of that space can be kind of like the cocoon time. It's the in-between of where we haven't quite become who we think we're become, or who we feel we're not who we were, and we're not yet who we feel ourselves longing to be, right?
And I'm not sure we ever fully arrive there.
Yeah.
Right. I think, I mean, my podcast is Journey Forward. I'm really passionate about guiding along the journey, because there's no arrival point. We never say, I'm done now. I get it. No more work. Personal reflection is like not necessary because I know myself fully and completely, and check that box. It's literally the journey. And to me, in the work that I do, in everything you named, from teaching from my essence and mindfulness meditation, all the things are spot on. It's how can we be in relationship to that in a more self-compassionate way, or in a more mindful way of whatever is arising, so we're not in full resistance, so we're not just complete surrender.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it is an ongoing process. Like evolution is ongoing. There isn't anywhere we're necessarily destined for. A lot of people come to me and they're like wondering, when is this going to happen, or when is that going to happen? And while astrology has been used for millennia for that sort of predictive technology, it, to me, matters less when the man of your dreams is going to walk into your life, or when you're going to get, you're going to get the thing that you've been wanting for. And more, what is it that you're doing? How are you working with what's here? What's in the way? What's alive right now? What is the process? It's a process of awareness. It's a process of learning. It's a process of self-reflection that ultimately would make us available to what life brings, right? Which sometimes life does bring what you've been asking for, or you do meet that person that you've been longing to meet. But it also came through a process of you being on your own life's journey, which never be replaced by the object that we might desire.
Yeah. So switching to a more broad, because that was very specific on my chart. I love that you did that. Thank you. That I think it gives the listeners great insight into not what you do specifically with the client, but the different aspects that your chart can show and demonstrate in ways to relate it to your own life. So that felt really special. Thank you for that. So many of the accounts that I follow on social media in talking about March this year, right now, we just entered into a big month, a big change. And I keep sharing so much of the posts, because it not only is marrying, again, where I'm at on my journey, so it feels really aligned for me, but what is so big going on astrologically right now. And you and I are talking today on March 2nd. So it's like this shift is just occurring. What is it about this time that has so much going on? And regardless of what sign you are, what is this time period in life? Because I've seen like major cycles of years coming to an end. Yeah. So what's going on like the bigger picture that you could share?
Well, Pluto is probably the largest time cycle of a planet. It's a 248-year cycle.
Wow.
And this month, on the 23rd of March, it will enter Aquarius for the first time in 248 years. That's a huge culmination. No one alive on this planet has been alive unless this is our reincarnated self,
right?
Through a Pluto.
In this iteration, no one's been here.
Nobody that's alive right now, I should say. All the souls have been through this already once before. If you believe in that sort of thing, in which, again, you don't have to believe in past lives in order to believe in astrology, or you don't even have to believe in astrology for it to be relevant. But so the Pluto transit is a big shift. And a part of what's happening this year is that it's dipping into the 0 degrees of Aquarius, where it hasn't been in 248 years. And it's going to spend a few months there, and then it's going to go back. And that is like sort of, one giant leap forward for mankind, and then a collective soul, recalibration. I think a lot will be initiated in this time period. That is things that we really haven't ever, we're on the precipice of change that's never been before in this lifetime for all human beings on the planet. And then at the same time, we have Saturn, who's been in Aquarius for the last 2.5 years, very much ending a cycle and entering Pisces for the next 2.5 years. And that ends again a 30-year cycle for Saturn. So these are long-term cycles. But what's unprecedented is that none of these cycles have culminated in this way ever in this way, and they will never be this way again in our lifetime. So we have what are collective and individual endings that are ending things that are just done for the rest of our lifetime in many respects. And I think of a lot of the evolutionary push for people at this time is to grow in ways that we've never grown before, to expand in ways that we've never expanded to before, to heal wounds from the past that we've never been able to really touch on before, and to have the courage and the willingness and the openness to open our minds to different things. And a lot of what, this month is going to bring is those kind of shifts that are irrevocable in a way, but also just the beginning, right? If we had the hindsight 10 years ago to know what we were going to go through, there's nothing we could have really done to prepare. We still would have had to go through the journey that we went through in order to get where we are. We're sort of on one of those sort of critical moments for all of life itself. And yet nobody really knows, there isn't any hindsight that can be like, this is where we're going to be 10 years from now. We can just know that it's going to be different from where we are.
And I think for many people, I will speak for myself, but obviously a lot of clients that I work with whose lives I know are felt on the precipice of shifting, and especially coming out of COVID, this all feels really refreshing to me. Like it all feels like good stuff. Like it feels like, okay, we've been through enough shit. Can we get to the point of expansion and healing and new cycles? Because it's about fucking time. I think how many people feel. So is it inaccurate for me to say these are necessarily, quote, good changes? I'm like using what might be a layman's interpretation of this. I guess my point is, I don't want to label it as good or bad. It's just different, correct?
Yeah,
Or
well,
is it, or does it feel more expansive in that healing way based on these alignments? Because my optimism says it's all going to be good.
I think astrology is one of those interesting things where it can meet us at the level of consciousness that we're at, right? And so not every person on the planet is going to experience these transits as good, right? At some level, it might feel deeply challenging. Even the good, like I look back at my divorce and the times in my life where I literally felt like my skin was being peeled off because so much of my life was changing. And what was being taken away from me was, financial, physical, emotional security, and or what was coming up was like deep changes relative to intimacy and partnership and, family and raising children. Like those things didn't feel like I could even call them good things at the time. But in hindsight, it's absolutely the best thing that could have ever happened, right? And it's not always in the way. I wish at that time in my life I had even more capacity to see the difficulties that I was going through as welcome, as opposed to being fearful about them.
Yeah.
So,
and that really speaks to your own belief system and how you relate to what's arising. And I love what you said about astrology meets us at the level of our consciousness, because I always say in my work, it's not about the thing, it's how you relate to the thing. Mm-hmm. And I've been going through an incredibly difficult past 6 months of the end of a relationship that I didn't want to end, and the off and the on and the off and the on, and just beginning to have come through that, but also the possibility for repair and reconnection with that person. And it's an optimistic and yet cautious time period. And yet, despite all of the pain, like gut wrenching, like you were saying, feeling like my skin's gonna, I want to get out of my own skin because it's so painful. I also had the mindset of, how would I respond differently if I knew this was all on divine timing? How would I respond differently if I knew this pain was in service to my highest self? And those two questions got me through so much of those hard moments that felt so in despair. And, I just invite the listeners as a reminder, like, no matter how difficult of a moment you're in, how you relate can impact your experience of it. Absolutely. Not that every single, trauma is going to lead to a silver lining. Sometimes trauma is just trauma for trauma, and we just got to heal. And, to meet at the level of our own consciousness is going to impact our overall relationship to ourselves, to healing, to wounds, all of it.
And what you're speaking to is like the questions that can take us into a soul level perspective of what is, why, what is arising, why meeting ourselves in that way with such deep compassion, right? And the vulnerability of how then, right, in this relationship, how then do I meet what may be possible or may be emerging, right? But from this perspective that brings my whole soul into meeting what's next. Because you went through that whole evolutionary cycle and now something new is beginning from that.
Yeah.
Right. And that's beautiful. It's really, that's a part of why I think astrology can be such a powerful tool.
Yeah. It's so beautiful. I have learned so much in talking with you, and I hope the listeners really have as well. One quick question before we wrap up. For people who conceptually believe in it, but look at their sign and say, I am so not a Capricorn, I'm so not a Cancer. What is like kind of an explanation or an interpretation when you just feel like, this is so not who I am? Like, what do I do with that? Because I've always wondered that question.
There's a lot of understanding about the sun sign and the horoscope astrology, because the sun sign is such a limited part of what the birth chart really is. Like if I'm a Capricorn, that's an earth sign, right? And that you might read the Capricorn horoscope, and it may, if you were actually a Leo rising and let's say a Scorpio moon, the Capricorn description of what's happening for Capricorn suns might not be really telling or really resonating with who you are, because so much more of your chart is like, there is a whole chart experience. And that would be like to say you're only a mom, right? Your identity as a mom is one aspect of who you are. It is not all of who you are. And so a lot of the times I think that people don't, like, I am a Leo rising and a Gemini moon and an Aquarius sun. So when I read the horoscopes, I read the Aquarius horoscopes. Most of the time, they're written for an Aquarius rising person, not for a Leo rising person. So I'll read the other ones to get a little bit more context. But that's why having an astrologer look at your whole chart and getting more of a picture from a whole person perspective, as opposed to a single sun sign orientation.
So the horoscopes are based on the sun sign.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And they put the sun on the ascendant in order to write it, but that's why often reading your ascendant sign is a more accurate description than the horoscope sun sign. And anyways, people are complex beings. Like it's just not, it's not enough information necessarily to make a whole person perspective.
Right. Like my nephew and I have the same birthday, and I don't think we could be more opposite.
You have completely different planetary placements.
Right. And so just to say, we're both Capricorns means absolutely nothing.
Exactly.
Or maybe not nothing, but not everything.
Yeah. Well, I mean, twins can be born with almost the same birth chart and be completely different human beings. So we have to really give context also to the soul and what the soul is here to learn, which is different and unique for each person.
Yeah. Oh, Michelle, I love this conversation. It's so fascinating. And I think as I work with clients, one of my biggest passions is helping make sense and understand ourselves. When we can understand ourselves, we can be more centered in love and compassion, which can impact all of our relationships. And this to me is just one more tool in our multitude of toolbox that we have as fellow teachers and healers and guides, right? It's just a different door into the same room, which is how can I understand myself better and live my life with greater ease, peace, and joy and abundance? Like that's all we want. Right? Like, I don't think there's anyone who's like, no, I don't want those things. It's like, it's what we all want. And so this really is just one other way to get to know ourselves, understand ourselves, make sense of maybe what doesn't feel sensical, have some of that intuitive, predictive, or just spiritual beliefs and understandings confirmed to say, okay, I get why I'm going through what I'm going through. Now I can maybe relax a little bit and stop fighting so damn hard.
Yeah. And I feel like the way you met yourself with those questions, sometimes we need another person to reflect that back to us. And that can be often one of the most potent gifts of an astrology reading, is just to be reflecting back, like, this is what's happening in the universe right now. This is what is. And here's how to work with it, in these energies. Yeah.
So how can people find you? What sort of offers do you have that people can partake in to work with you and learn more?
I am at astrologywithmichelle.com. That's MICHELLE. And I every month do a new moon ceremony and have a monthly transmission, and that is open to anyone. It's a really wonderful way to get to know astrology and to learn more. then you can also book a one-on-one session with me on my website. And I do class series, 6 months class series. The next one starting is Love Evolution, and it's all about Venus and Pluto and the journey of healing the feminine heart. So
I love that. I love that so much. Michelle, this has been so lovely. I'm so glad to have stayed in connection with you over the years, such one of those multitude of intersections at different points of our lives. So I look forward to see where our paths continue to cross, since I'm sure that they will. And everyone listening, I hope that you resonated with something meaningful today, and hopefully give you some insight into more curiosity of different ways to get to know yourself and your path and your journey, and different ways to heal what needs to be healed, because I don't think we're ever done on that part of our human experience, at least in this iteration. So, well, thank you guys so much for tuning in. The links to get in touch with Michelle will be in the show notes, and I hope that you all take care and be well.
To continue your journey forward, find Jory Rose on Facebook and Instagram to become part of her growing community. You can also gain access to her meditations, books, online classes, or to sign up for an upcoming retreat. Visit her at joryrose.com. That's JOREEROSE.com.